Okay, so robots. They're like the big question mark, right? Like, are they going to actually take over our jobs this time? It's a little anxiety-inducing, isn't it? But what if, instead of stealing our jobs, this whole AI thing is more like, I don't know, replacing the horse? And we're the horse.
Yeah, that's the unsettling comparison that this YouTube essay, it's called AI-Powered Robots Will Soon Be Everywhere, is making.
Wow. So it's from this channel, Farzad. I've seen it. And they go deep into research by this think tank, Rethink X. And they're saying that AI robots, the human-looking ones, are going to be even more disruptive than any tech we've seen, like ever.
Yeah, and their argument is like built on this thing called the disruption X curve. And it's not just that robots are getting really good at stuff, it's that they're getting cheaper, like really fast.
Oh, okay. So kind of like when smartphones came out, you didn't need a separate camera, GPS, music player. That one thing just sort of changed everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Rethink X actually looked at this pattern through history,
Yeah.
whether it was like cameras or insulin or even just simple things like core nails. The minute a tech gets 10 times better or cheaper, boom, disruption. It's not random, it's like a pattern.
So they're saying robots are going to be 10 times better at, well, everything.
Well, not necessarily better, but cheaper, like way cheaper. Their projections show that robot labor costs could be less than $1 an hour by like 2035.
Seriously?
Yeah, and get this, by 2045, they're saying under 10 cents an hour.
Hold on 10 secs. For a robot that can work all day, probably doesn't complain about the air conditioning.
Right.
What job is even left at that point?
And that's the thing, right? The essay's point is we aren't just talking about replacing like factory workers.
Yeah.
This affects, well, everything. Every industry is going to feel it.
It's like you've seen those old photos of Fifth Avenue, where at first there's like one car looking totally out of place with all these horses around.
Yeah.
And then like a few years later, there's one horse in a sea of cars.
Exactly.
Except this time, we're the horse.
And that speed, right, how fast it happens, that's key. Just like cars change transportation basically overnight, Rethink X is arguing that this isn't just about some jobs being lost, it's about a fundamental shift in how all work gets done.
So it's like a whole system reboot, not just robots doing what we already do, but doing it in a way that changes, well, everything.
Right. The essay actually compares it to like when we got electricity.
Okay.
Before that, you had to design a whole society around like local power sources,
Yeah.
water wheels, whatever. But electricity, that changed how we made things where we lived.
Yeah, it's true. We take that for granted now, but imagine if your job was tied to like the one steam engine in town.
Exactly. And the point is, it's not just that stuff got easier with electricity, it's that whole new possibilities opened up. Things people couldn't have even pictured before.
Okay, I like where you're going with this. So robots are our electricity.
Kind of. The essay says robots could do that for labor. Like early on. Sure, we'll see them doing those dirty, dangerous, and dull jobs. The ones most people don't actually want.
Makes sense. Like instead of some guy risking his neck in a mine.
Exactly. Backbreaking labor, stuff like that. Robots are, like, made for that.
Which, I mean, on the surface, that's good, right? Safer workplaces.
Yeah.
And honestly, the products are probably better quality, too, because a robot's not going to, mess up your order because it's Friday afternoon.
Exactly. And the essay really digs into this idea of, like, incredible abundance because of it.
Abundance.
Yeah. Imagine, right, a world where everything's, like, super cheap, really high quality because the actual labor to make it is basically free.
Okay, so instead of robots taking jobs, it's more like, what happens if we don't need jobs the same way?
That's the big question. Like, what could we accomplish if suddenly the amount of stuff we can make isn't limited by how many humans are around to do it?
Oh.
Right. But there's a catch, of course. The essay makes it clear. All this utopia stuff only happens if we actually manage this whole thing right.
So, like, it's not inevitable. We could screw it up.
Oh, totally. The essay actually calls for this, like massive coordinated investment to get ready. They compare it to the Manhattan Project.
Okay, so less wait and see how it goes, more everyone freak out and solve this now. What needs to actually happen? So, assuming we can, like, pull off this Manhattan Project level thing,
Yeah.
what needs to happen? How do we make sure it's not just robots driving around in Teslas while the rest of us are, I don't know, picking up trash?
Yeah, well, it's not like we can just, like, put the brakes on this whole thing.
Yeah.
The essay says that much is certain technological unemployment, it's coming.
Right. It's like we've known about this since, like, the Terminator movies or whatever, but...
But it's not all, like, doom and gloom either.
Okay, so less fighting the robots, more, I don't know, figuring out how to live with them.
I think more like, how do we thrive alongside them? That's the question, right? And the essay says that this starting period, it's actually super important because, and this is kind of surprising, at first, these robots, they're mostly going to be taking care of existing demand.
Hmm. Okay.
So it's going to look like, at least for a while, like jobs are being created, not just replaced.
Oh, so it's not like lights out, everyone's job is gone overnight.
Exactly. It's like a, I don't know how to put it, a window of opportunity. It's not a solution in itself, but we've got a little time.
Shoot, then what are we supposed to do with that time?
Well, that's where the essay says it's got to be all hands on deck, like D-Day level mobilization. Governments, universities, everyone. Research, testing, like really thinking about how society even functions when work itself is different.
Which is tough to even wrap your head around. I mean, if we're not all showing up at some office or whatever, what are we doing all day?
Right. It's a total mind shift.
And speaking of, the essay said something about the whole humanoid design of these robots. Why is that so important? It seems like we could have all kinds of robot shapes depending on what they're doing.
It's really interesting, actually, when you think about it. By starting with robots that look like us, it makes this whole thing a bit less scary. Right?
Oh, that's a good point. Like, better a robot butler than, I don't know, a giant metal spider making your coffee, even if it does it perfectly.
Right. And that little bit of familiarity buys us time to figure out the bigger questions, like what does it even mean to be human when we have all this help?
Whoa. And suddenly robots taking over the world doesn't seem like the big worry. It's more like, what do we actually want from our lives if we don't have to work?
Exactly. The essay gives us the framework, but the answers, those are for all of us to figure out.
Wow, some heavy stuff to ponder. Big thanks to you for, walking us through all this, and to our listeners. If you made it this far, congrats on surviving another deep dive. Keep those thinking caps on, and we'll see you next time.